It's really amazing still how much is still ambiguous out there, even after all these years. But it seems like, I feel like we're just going to get clarity in just one swoop, maybe in the next 4 years. And now with the bipartisan support and with the combination of that and probably court cases coming along that we're going to see decisions on, we may finally get clarity in about crypto in the US.
I would hope so. It would be great if we did.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Flywheel, your number one source for everything crypto, DeFi, and all that's in between. If you want to know what's going on in the world on chain, well, you come to the right place. This is DeFi Dave, here solo dolo, and I'm here to help you harness the power of the flywheel. And this time around, we have on for the third time, number 3, Alex G, who's a lawyer who's been in crypto for a while. And we talk about the changing regulatory landscape and changing tone in the US. We just had, FIT21 have incredible bipartisan support. The legislative branch coming together against SAB 121, the ETH ETF crossing a major hurdle and looks like it's going to pass. A complete shift in DC, where what was once a partisan issue may actually bring together the political parties and actually have bipartisan consensus. So we go into all that. We talk about everything that needs to know there. We actually get into Alex's new project a bit, MetaLex, at the end, which is doing some really cool, innovative stuff DAO-wise. And you're going to want to stick around for that. So, Alex G, friend of the show, always love chopping up with him. So you're going to really enjoy this one. But before we get into it, make sure you go ahead, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell button, so you never miss an episode. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Give us a like. Make sure you go ahead. Follow us on all our social media on Twitter, TikTok, and Telegram at Flywheel DeFi. Go ahead, subscribe to our website, flywheeldefi.com. You can follow me on Twitter at DeFi Dave 22. And let's get the flywheel spinning. Welcome back to Flywheel. I'm your host, DeFi Dave, here with our resident legal advisor, Alex G. He's working on something really cool with MetaLex. But before we get into it, I wanted to get you on because it seems like in the past week and a half, I've never seen such a turn, like such a 180 in regulation. No one could have imagined this, especially in the US. The beat on the drum was basically, we don't accept crypto. We're doing like Operation Choke Point. We want it out of here. And then all of a sudden with this ETH ETF and the combination of that with the bipartisan support for FIT21 and against SAB 21, like it's really feels like things are changing. It really feels like the US is finally like woken up and people are talking about crypto and it's at the forefront of everyone's minds. Alex, I guess what is your reaction to start off? What is your reaction to this sudden change in the vibe?
Sure, man. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me back on. It's always a pleasure to be on Flywheel. And it's been a little bit of a whirlwind for the last couple of weeks. So we've seen almost like the U.S. government do a complete 180. And I think that there's a few things that have gone into it, but it's certainly at minimum a vibe shift, right? I mean, I think that almost is too light a term to capture what's happening. And
what do you think caused this?
Well, it's I think that there's a few. It's sort of a confluence of circumstances, right? I mean, number one, oddly enough, I think the SAB 121 legislation, overturning the SEC and.
Before we get into what for our viewers at home that don't know what SAB 121 is, what is it exactly? And
nobody knows what SAB 121 is. It's fundamentally somewhat unimportant, what the actual rule was, but it basically has to do with how it's really an accounting rule, and it has to do with how if you're a custodian of digital assets for third parties, how you have to account for being that type of custodian on a balance sheet and who can be a custodian of digital assets. And so part of the part of the, it's funny, right? Because we stand kind of in opposition to banks, as, and intermediaries in the crypto industry. But like, I think part of the groundswell against SAB 121 wasn't really a groundswell. It's a big problem for banks to have to follow this rule, and banks have a lot of pull, so they started to say, hey, like, it's not great for us to like have this classification as something we can do.
Basically, crypto assets could count as liabilities, but it couldn't count towards assets in the balance sheet. And so that's basically what it was. And all the banks were like, well, what the fuck? We're like, it doesn't make sense for custody of these assets. And
we can't custody these assets if we have to have an equivalent amount of cash doing nothing on our balance sheet, is basically the upshot of the rule.
Yeah.
And they don't like that. And so, they went to their lobbyists and said, hey, fix this. And, okay. And then I think that's kind of what caused Trump to make some sort of like offhand comment on the campaign trail about how he's going to support crypto. And then it sort of looked like, and still kind of looks like, oh, this could actually become, just like anything, a partisan issue going into the election. And I think that kind of catalyzed a lot of the Democrats to sort of look at like, okay, what's the horse trade that's going on with this opposition to crypto? Like, it's a very niche issue, not to us, right? To us, our lifeblood, it's our industry, it's what we wake up and do every day. But for most people, crypto is a very niche issue. And I think that for a lot of politicians, they just don't think about it at all. There's some politicians who are very pro, some who are very against, but most of the middle is people who don't care. And so I think a lot of the politicians in the middle, especially those in the Democratic Party, just started to ask the question of like, well, who is our constituency to be anti-crypto that we seem to be defaulting towards? And do we want that? And I think the answer ended up for a lot of them being, well, no, what's the upside of being so vociferously anti-crypto when you have this, like, I think there's a narrative about money laundering that's kind of like a sort of like law enforcement type narrative, which doesn't like, has not.
That's the oldest one in the book.
Yeah, it's the oldest one in the book, and it doesn't really move numbers that much for Democratic voters. So I think that it sort of caused there to be a little bit of introspection within the Democratic Party about how we got to where we are right now in terms of crypto regulation, which is really a sort of narrow segment of the Democratic Party, specifically like Liz Warren and Gary Gensler, kind of got their hands.
Yeah, and they're such a minority, but they're in such positions of power that it caused such a tidal wave like down the line, and like no one's gonna fight them because in politics you have to pick your battles.
Right. And you got to spend political capital, and you have a finite amount of it, and it's not always that's not where a lot of people wanted to spend it. And the fact is, like, financial regulation, like FinReg in general, it's just not that sexy of an issue. So the fact that you had Liz Warren, for the last during like when the Biden administration was sort of forming, saying, "Hey, I'm into FinReg. I want my people holding the levers for FinReg." There wasn't a lot of pushback because it wasn't like a big sexy thing. It just sort of like, okay, that happened. And like, for reasons that are not entirely clear to me, of course, Liz Warren is like very anti-crypto. She's in the category of politicians who is just dead set opposed to it and willing to spend political capital to make it difficult to use crypto in the US. But I think that what we've seen now is with the initially the position of Biden was, well, if this SAB 121 repeal gets passed, I'm going to veto it, and he still could veto it. I think he's still within the 60 days to veto it, and that was quite an extreme position if you think about it. I mean, legislation gets vetoed like somewhat regularly, but it's like certainly not the default. And it's like, okay, well, what is so terrible about like, or not so terrible, but like, what does it even work? We're talking about an accounting regulation.
Yeah.
Like, why is this like the president going to step in and veto?
Not only that, I think symbolically this is huge for two reasons. Like, one, it's the first time I can really remember that the legislator coming together to actually create laws like they're supposed to. And, people have to remember the executive branch, they enforce laws. The legislative branch, they make the laws. The executive branch, when they're unchecked, they're just going to do shit like SAB 121, and they're just going to go wild with Operation Choke Point. And now you have the legislative branch, which is the will of the people. The people vote in their local representatives, whether they're, at the district level or senator level, to do their job and represent them. And they're actually doing their job. They're overturning a federal regulatory statute. And if the president vetoes it, I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, finally, we get some like bipartisan support for something, and then like he's going to go and veto it. But we'll see. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but it was really the timing of that, the whole SAB 121 issue coming to a head at the same time that the ETH ETF, approved, and we can talk a little bit about like what approval really means, because it's not like this binary thing that I think a lot of people sort of want it to be, right? Where it's like, okay, it's approved. There's stages to it. But the point is, last week on Thursday, we had a fairly critical stage to the ETF approval. And the conventional wisdom, as I'm sure you know, had been, well, it's going to get rejected and maybe we'll revisit it in 2025. And, it's not the same as Bitcoin, And then you've, of course, seen all of this recent posturing with the SEC, where they're sort of like, is ETH a security? That's going to come up in this litigation with Consensus, less so with the litigation with Uniswap. But it was, it felt like the SEC was like sort of taking a hard charge at crypto that we had not really seen.
You can definitely tell this is that we were in the fight me phase. Like, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. This is clearly deep in the fight me phase. Yeah. And the SEC's going, poking the bear, Consensus, Uniswap, MetaMask, Coinbase, whoever else.
Yeah.
Literally these companies with such deep pockets and such like deep, like I'm sure legal teams, and they've been preparing and ready for this. I don't know what the hell the SEC was thinking.
No, and so it almost seemed like a foregone conclusion that they were going to reject the ETH ETF, right? Because that's an easy thing to do compared to suing Coinbase,
Yeah, you would think like you could tell that we're like deep in the fight me phase because of the desperation from the SEC with their recent actions, and meanwhile, like in the past, letting FTX go, letting like all these different meeting with FTX. I think like the craziest lesson I've learned over the past year is what regulatory capture actually looks like. Because I think I feel like, I know for me, I don't think I could have like comprehended or imagined it, because it just seems so like, I don't know what else to say, but like corrupt. But really, it's just like a way of doing business. It's just like, oh, like we trust these people. We're in positions of power. These are our friends. We're going to give them like the industry to go over. And that's like what SBF was so close to doing. He was so close. I don't think people realize how lucky we were that FTX collapsed when it did.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to the regulatory capture point, I mean, if you look at like the structure of FTX and who SBF was like using for his legal team was mainly made up of Sullivan and Cromwell, right? Which is a very fancy, highly regarded law firm. Why are they a fancy? Well, not necessarily why, but chicken and egg, like you said, regulatory capture. The reason Sullivan and Cromwell has the position it does, especially in the realm of like commodities, derivatives regulation, and securities regulation, is because a huge number of CFTC and SEC lawyers leave, especially enforcement attorneys, leave their position for the federal government and go to work for Sullivan and Cromwell. And it's important, right, if you're somebody like SBF, because you're not just hiring your lawyers at that point for their legal acumen, and they have plenty of talented lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell. You're also hiring them because of their connections, right? I mean, if the guy was working at, or the person, I should say, was working at the CFTC last year, now they're in private practice, well, they still know a bunch of people at the CFTC, and it's the power of being able to call somebody on the phone. It's quite important, and I do think that it's worth thinking about SBF and FTX in this moment, because if you look at the chain of events that led up to the wheels falling off of FTX. I'm a strong believer that what started it was a piece of legislation known as the DCCPA, right, which was SBF's like big regulatory push. It was why he was in DC pressing the flesh. It was why, you know, he had people like Maxine Waters calling him a genius and all that shit, right? Is because like he wanted to see legislation that would, in essence, create a regulatory moat around FTX to get rid of FTX's competitors and to create. And this is when people talk about registration regimes. This is one of the important things to think about a registration regime is that it favors incumbents. It favors the people who already have the resources to sort of navigate new bureaucratic apparatuses. And SBF very much wanted that. And a big part of like the pushback, especially from like CZ and Binance against FTX and, you know, what caused in a certain sense CZ to start undermining the FTT token is the fact that CZ sort of rightly thought that the DCCPA was going to an attempt to fence Binance out of the U.S. And it's sort of the whole dispute between these two centralized exchange juggernauts in the world kind of came to a head because of these regulatory issues. And so and I want to like, again, I think it's important to think about that because I'm sure one of the things we're going to talk about today is the FIT 21 Act. And I think it's very important to like look at the FIT 21 Act using the same lens that we looked at the DCCPA.
Wait, let's get to the FIT 21 Act. Like, what do you mean? Like, how should we look at it in the same lens as the DCPA?
So the FIT 21 Act was known as the crypto infrastructure market structure kind of bill, and it's been floating around for a while. Actually, it's been kicked around, and people had not been paying attention to it for like months and months and months because one, it's huge. It's like almost 300-page piece of legislation. So if you wanted to become an expert in it, it was going to take some time, and nobody really thought it was going to go anywhere until about a week and a half ago when it went somewhere, you know, and got through the House. So what is FIT 21? Well, it is really the first attempt by the U.S. government to enact a piece of legislation that comprehensively parcels out the role of the SEC and the role of the CFTC as to tokens. The DCCPA took a slightly different approach, right, where it was really just focused on the sort of derivatives part. But what you have in FIT 21 is an attempt to create sort of special rules around digital commodities is how it's described in the law. And so there's part of it that is an attempt to create there's really three parts. I mean, there's several parts, but the three main parts are the one on the for SEC regulations, right? So when do token offerings constitute securities offerings, and then creating sort of some safe harbors that people who want to raise funds using tokens can take advantage of that don't exist now. So that's part of it. The other part of it is this regulatory, the part of it that I'm most interested in is this regulatory framework they're trying to establish around DeFi, right? And around the trading of tokens as commodities. And I don't agree with FIT 21's approach at all, and we can kind of get into that.
I don't agree with it either, but we can get into that later.
And then, of course, there's a stable, like everything, there's a stable coin part of it, you know, because the federal government can't quite figure out what they want to do with stable coins either. And I think there's some NFT parts of it as well. But so it's quite ambitious, and it's sort of good to see this level of ambition from the federal government. So that passed.
Yeah, I concur there.
Yeah, it's good, right? I mean, it's good to see them swinging the bat. I think they missed with this one, but you know, it's still good to try.
I think they missed with this. I say it's a good effort, and it's great to see bipartisan support for something. But my problem with this bill is that it categorizes tokens and digital assets as either commodities or securities. And in my opinion, it's just a completely novel form of money, a completely novel asset in itself. And there
Right.
should be a new category with new definitions and new regulations because it's so fundamentally different than a commodity. It could have some characteristics that are like a commodity, some that maybe some maybe like a security, but that doesn't mean it is a commodity or is a security.
That's right. That's right. And I think, on the security side, I do think that one of the things they get right in the bill, maybe not in the details, but in the sort of overall thinking, is like people have been and are going to continue to use tokens to raise capital, right? That's not going away. It's been probably one of the most successful, I can't think of anything else, at least in my lifetime, where you've seen a new way of forming capital arise in such a short period of time, right? It clearly, something clicked in terms of global capitalism with the use of tokens for fundraising. And I do think that it's good to think about from a legislative standpoint, how, looking at this technology, right, how do we protect investors who want to use their capital and invest their capital through tokens? What is the actual best way to protect the investing public? And I think that having the way that, again, broadly speaking, Fit 21 conceives of exemptions from registration for certain types of fundraising through tokens is fairly thoughtful and I think at least a useful starting point. But to your point about the sort of trying to shoehorn all of DeFi and digital assets into the CFTC, it's really problematic. And I actually think that there's another reason that it's problematic that just comes down to first principles, right? Which is that the Commodities Exchange Act and the CFTC are primarily focused on regulating derivatives, right? Not the exchange of commodities themselves. And there's, the CFTC, of course, always points to, well, we can go regulate spot markets and commodities to prevent fraud and manipulation in the derivatives exchange. And and when I say derivatives, what I'm talking about, I think that this will be intuitive to most people who are in DeFi, but maybe they're not familiar with the term. Derivative is like a futures contract related to commodity. So, and from a legal standpoint, one of the biggest differentiators between the spot market, which is just the sort of buying and selling of a commodity, right? One of my favorite lines, I can't remember who said this, is somebody, a lawyer, somebody was describing a spot commodities market, and somebody else said, "Oh, you mean a store?" And so, one of the things that differentiates a spot market in commodities from derivatives market is this idea of physical delivery, right? So if I enter an agreement with you where I'm going to buy, 1,000 bushels of corn or whatever, and in 3 weeks you're going to put the corn on a train and it's going to come to me and I'm going to get the corn, that's not a derivatives. That's not a derivative. I'm just buying corn from you, right? But that distinction is very fuzzy when you're talking about a digital asset, right? And I don't even mean just crypto. You can point to another good example is a carbon offset credit, right? That only exists on a computer. It doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that if I'm selling you a carbon offset credit, I'm not going to put a credit in an envelope and mail it to you. It's a computer transaction, just like that. And so one of the big mistakes of Fit 21 is to just say, as a first principle, all spot transactions in digital commodities are subject to CFTC regulation because they're sufficiently like derivatives that we just want the CFTC to regulate them. And to me, it's not at all apparent that that's the right approach from a regulatory standpoint.
Yeah, it seems like an extra step. It seems like a reach
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially like such different situations from delivering corn to your doorstep to delivering a digital asset. Like one, there's so much logistics and time and effort to like bring that corn to you like physically, and then with a digital asset, I can just like send it to you. So
Yeah.
literally, like,
And it is very,
this is what I mean. There's such fundamentally different assets. They deserve their own category.
They deserve their own category, right? And so what you have in Fit 21 is this desire to expand the concept of they create this concept, which is I think probably one of the most important concepts in the law, of a digital commodity broker, and that's just anybody who who will sell you one or more digital asset, right? So if I sell you an ETH, right? And I have a business where I'll sell you ETH. I'm a digital commodity broker under Fit 21. Very simple.
What does that mean for liquidity pools that are immutable and on chain?
Yeah,
they can't go and register, you know.
They get right. And so this is, I think, one of the things that the Fit 21 simultaneously gets very right and very wrong. So what Fit 21 gets very right is they say the only way that we can have a commodity style regulatory regime that makes sense with respect to digital assets is if we have some type of wholesale exemption for DeFi, right? And like when I say a wholesale exemption for DeFi, what I mean is an exemption for the sort of rails of DeFi, right? Where you have, like you said, liquidity pools, like lending protocols, et cetera, that are immutable, they exist on chain, and they're just computer software, right? And like there's nothing to register with those. So it's good. So that's what Fit 21 gets right. Is like we have to start with having this category of like DeFi software that's not going to be subject to registration.
It's really amazing that they mentioned decentralized finance by name in the bill. We've come so far. Cool.
Yeah. We've come a long way for sure. But what I think they get wrong, what I think Fit 21 gets wrong, and I think almost sort of fatally wrong with respect to that law, is that it doesn't really go far enough in how it's defined DeFi, right? And what constitutes DeFi. Because one of the things that we always talk about, I think this is my third time coming on Flywheel, and both of the two previous times we've sort of talked about these issues around front ends, right? And around like, we talked about like the UkiDAO case and all that kind of thing, where it's like, well, what is the CFTC trying to do there? They're trying to like take down a front end. And so on the one hand, front ends are like the sort of like least, from a technical standpoint, the least interesting part of DeFi, right? Because what's really interesting are the smart contracts, right? These like permissionless and composable contractual arrangements. That's what's cool about it. But like, let's face facts, right? I don't know Python. I'm not.
You're not going into the code. You're not in the command line.
Yeah. I'm not using the command line. I'm opening up my web browser and I'm going to Aave. Like that's how I'm getting there. And so you have to make sure that like if what you really want to do is make sure that the software itself is not subject to regulation, then you have to include as part of that software the actual user interfaces that users use, which is
especially Etherscan. That's the first thing that comes up in my head.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think they tried to do it in Fit 21, but like the problem with how Fit 21 is drafted is that like you almost have to like draft a law like that where it's like, okay, the SEC and the CFTC are the enemy here. Not that they're necessarily the enemy, but like whatever daylight you give them to go out and do enforcement and regulation, they're going to take, right? So if you want something to be off limits to them, you have to really
like explicitly exempt DeFi.
Yeah. And that means, exempting. And so when I say like exempting the front end and making sure the front end is part of DeFi, I don't just mean like, like the HTML code or all that. I mean, actually, the like action of allowing a user to access a smart contract, right? Like that needs to be part of DeFi. And the problem is that when you're in Commodities Exchange Act land and in CFTC land, the whole trigger for their regulatory authority is soliciting and accepting orders. Well, if you want to protect DeFi, you have to say, if I have a website that somebody can go to and they can plug a DApp into that website and connect to a smart contract that way, that is not soliciting an order. That is not soliciting or accepting an order. And I think that FIT21 just does not go far enough in that regard.
Do you think FIT21 will pass?
I don't think so.
Okay.
And I'm almost like part of me, but I do think it's like a useful exercise, right?
I think so too.
And I think that like the politics of FIT21 are like somewhat straightforward, at least in my mind. Like it's got to go through banking in the Senate, which means it's got to go through Sherrod Brown.
There's no way. For those who don't know, Sherrod Brown is also in the same camp of Warren in his anti-crypto stance. And also, not just that, I don't think anything has gone past the banking committee in like 6 years or something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of a graveyard, and so
it is a graveyard.
For that reason, it's like it's not going to go anywhere. But thinking about what does an exemption for DeFi look like is like very useful.
Yeah,
right?
It's good that we're getting the conversation going. And in between FIT21, which is far from perfect, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And also a few weeks ago, you have the Department of Justice with their MEV case, or like the counter MEV case. And what really impressed me was like the understanding of MEV was I think surprised a lot of people. So my question is like, do you think understanding of crypto and blockchain and how all this shit works is improving in DC? And like, what does that mean for the future, for future legislation and rulings?
I think that like, it is. I think it is improving. I think that there's a lot of congressional staffers and people in executive agencies who really understand and use the technology. Like, it's hard to discount how big an impediment it's been that you have these regulatory agencies where everybody who's involved with them is just wholesale barred from owning crypto. Right? It's been a real problem just in terms of like an understanding of the technology within those agencies, because like the best way to understand crypto is to use it. You can read about it and everything, and it's helpful to read about it, but until you actually like have your MetaMask and you plug it into a DApp and you start trying to like figure out how all this stuff works, it's very difficult, I think, just from like reading articles.
What do you think
to put it together?
Yeah, what do you think as an industry we can do to, improve DeFi literacy and crypto literacy? Should we send like all the congressmen and their staffers ETH and have them fuck around on like Aave and whatnot and use MetaMask and all that fun stuff?
I think that part of it is that we have to kind of accept that we are a niche industry as much as we don't want to be, right? And so, part of our lobbying effort does have to be the sort of like basic educational, not talking down to people, but just like, understanding that like, yes, it is a problem that there are like people in these agencies that people are just not allowed to use it. That is a problem, but it's also not something that everybody's just going to use, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I don't want to go down the whole road of like, do we have like a use case or what have you? That's like a different can of worms.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it is still quite niche, and so we just have to make sure that like. We can like have people in our lobbying organizations who are good at explaining the technology without resorting to a lot of jargon. And like we as an industry do suffer from high uses of jargon.
We're definitely guilty of that. But one thing that, we can't ignore anymore is even though crypto is a single vote issue, it's becoming a sizable block for sure. More so than any other election. And one thing I've noticed is I feel like I've seen online people start to shame people like, oh, there's like more out there than crypto, which there is. But I feel like if your livelihood depends on crypto, and then like whatever regime is out there is hostile to it, and then outright bans it, well, you'll have like no choice but to go offshore. And I'm just like really against the shaming of crypto being a single vote issue, because I think it definitely deserves being a one vote issue. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that it's my sort of setting aside like my like personal politics, I do think that you have to be realistic about how people vote, right? And people, like you said, if your perception is that one political party over the other is doing something which will actually like impact your livelihood, and you have to go like find a different career if one party stays in power over the other, then yeah, of course it's going to influence like how you vote. And I don't necessarily think that like it's all that productive to like shame people for like making their choices, because we live in a society in the U.S. We have a binary choice when we go to the poll, right? Virtually every time. And that means that every time you vote for somebody in the U.S., you are accepting that they've like taken a position that you don't agree with on something or another, right? There's very people, I think, who look at one politician and say, I disagree with that guy top to bottom, or that person top to bottom. And so, there's no sense in shaming people, I think, for their like relative priorities, right? And what they're going to hold their nose about a candidate and what they're not. I don't know that it's to crypto's benefit. In fact, I don't think it is to crypto's benefit as an industry to have it be a partisan issue. I don't think we want to live in a world where like the GOP is the crypto party and the Democrats are the anti-crypto party. Like that, we're not going to get to where we want to be, I think, if that's the.
And we're going to fall behind.
And we're going to fall behind, exactly. And like you said, one of the like very encouraging things about Fit 21, setting aside the actual text, is the fact that it was like broadly bipartisan, not like it was basically one party and then a handful of votes from the other party. It was really, I mean, there were more GOP than Democrats who supported it for sure, but it was still broadly bipartisan. And I think that's what we want, right? We want, like, it's not like, you don't see like the banking industry, right? It's not like, oh, the GOP is the banking party. No, that's not.
They're both the banking party.
They're both the banking party. Yeah. And so, I do think that it's
so.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Do you think the Democratic leadership that instigated this 180 that we've seen? Do you think this is a genuine change, or do you see them just doing this for the election, and once they're voted in, they're going to do a bait and switch and be hostile towards crypto again?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably the case. I think the GOP is going to do the same thing, to be honest, because like there's a wide gulf. This is not just crypto, right? There's a wide gulf between election rhetoric and how the sausage gets made, right? And all the trade-offs that go into actually like producing legislation and regulations and having them become law and go live. And so, I don't actually think, and this kind of dovetails with what I was saying before about how, I don't know that we want crypto to be a partisan issue. Like, sound bites are only going to get us so far in crypto politics. And it's not really that far at all, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in crypto is like very nuanced, and it requires like very nuanced policymaking, And there's some stuff where, the structure of the U.S. financial system stands in complete contrast to crypto, regardless of who's in power, and we don't have a political constituency. Like, I think that you have to separate out, the SEC, CFTC sort of regulatory issues, for example, from the money service business, money transmitter issues, right? And one thing that I think really flew under the radar, but is very encouraging to me, is they passed a law in Oklahoma at the beginning of this month. Very little fanfare, that said, among other things, operating a validator in the state of Oklahoma will never be considered money transmission. And an
Wow, that's
activity that
huge.
requires a money transmission license. And that type of legislation is huge, right? Because one of the ways that if the U.S. government really wants to choke off crypto and to like stop people in the U.S. from ever touching it, they're not going through the SEC and they're not going through the CFTC. They're going through FinCEN, right? They're going through financial crimes, money services businesses, unlicensed money transmission, money laundering. That's how you put a stop to it. And so far, the federal government has stopped short of saying operating a validator node on Ethereum is money transmission. But that door is open, right? If you look at like the Tornado Cash case and like the Samurai indictment that just came down, there is a lot of they are clearly positioning themselves to where they can say that if you're profiting from validating transactions on a blockchain, you are on some level engaged in money transmission, and I don't think that people appreciate enough that if that's the case, it's kind of game over. Like whatever we've been talking about with the SEC and CFTC,
It doesn't matter. It's over.
yeah, it's all low stakes.
It's really amazing still how much is still ambiguous out there, even after all these years. But it seems like I feel like we're just going to get clarity in just one swoop, maybe in the next 4 years. And now with the bipartisan support and with the combination of that and probably court cases coming along that we're going to see decisions on, we may finally get clarity in about crypto in the U.S.
I would hope so. It would be great if we did.
So at this point, is Gary Gensler like a lame duck regulator at this point? Like, has his political capital been completely spent?
It seems that way. It seems like he's kind of done. I'm not necessarily the person who's in the room having these conversations. I'm not necessarily.
No.
I'm in the room. So all of my information is secondhand, but it does not seem like, hindsight being what it is, it does not seem like the amount of capital he spent on being anti-crypto is particularly worth it. First of all, he doesn't have much to show for it, right? And then
he has L's to show for it.
He's got a lot of L's, and then one of the talking points that I think has really sort of bitten the SEC in the ass is whenever Gary Gensler goes on CNBC or whatever and says, why are we talking about crypto? Crypto is this like 1% of 1% of the overall capital market in the U.S. and it's just not that important. And then like, okay, fine, like that's actually that in and of itself is a legitimate point. But then when you look at what portion of their enforcement budget is going towards crypto, it's sort of the whole mentality doesn't really make sense. And I just don't think that like, because I think it was no secret, right, that Gensler was trying to like make a name for himself at the SEC so that if Biden got a second term, he would be considered to replace Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary. I think that was really what he wanted. And I think it's off the table for him. Because
I'm not even sure he'll stay at the SEC at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that actually one of the interesting things that I'm hearing about that's happening internally at the SEC is that went into the ETF, going on the next stage in terms of its approval, is the other commissioners, right, are turning against Gensler, and they're saying, we don't really want to like go down with the ship on this anti-crypto thing.
And now you're seeing in our industry itself this rhetoric of blacklist anybody that worked at the SEC that like worked to like make our lives more difficult.
Oh yeah, I think, and you know what? I think it's good. Yeah, I do. I mean, like, I to a certain extent, I understand both sides of it because, like, you're a lawyer, you represent your client, and if your client is the government, that doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with everything the government is doing. But, like, it is incredibly frustrating, right, to see former regulatory attorneys, like enforcement attorneys, go into private practice and then immediately like do these 180s where they're just like, okay, now we're pro crypto, come give me lots of money. And it's like, no, man, fuck off. Like,
this has been happening for a decade. Remember the New York financial the guy that passed the bit license, and then he left for a private practice that specialized in getting a bit license.
Yeah, it's quite frustrating, and so I understand where people are coming from, where they're just like, especially like, you know, these huge organizations that hire these big firms are like, no, we've spent like tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars dealing with these problems these regulatory agencies are creating. No, I do not want to hire your law firm. If you're just, you know, turning around and hiring those same people. And like, you know, in terms of like what we were seeing, like with FTX and everything, it's another way, it's another sort of example of like, hey, there's a lot of corruption that's like sort of endemic with regulatory capture. And you can say like, yeah, okay, like it's just,
that's my conspiracy theory. I believe is real now, is regulatory capture, and not just in crypto. It happens in every industry.
It happens, and it's hardly a conspiracy theory. It's just the way the world works. You know?
Yeah.
But with crypto, it's like it becomes somewhat of a black and white issue, right? Because it's like you know. There's enough competent people in crypto who, especially in crypto law, who didn't ever work for a regulator, that like you can afford, I think, as even a large crypto business to say, yeah, we don't really want to like deal with that with that set of people.
Let's take a step back and talk about the ETH ETF, because this is one that really took a lot of people by surprise. I mean, before people were putting the odds at 25%. And then all of a sudden it was at 75%. And what stage are we at with the ETF? Because in the news it said it was approved, but we know there's more steps to that.
There's more steps, yeah. And this gets kind of beyond my sort of limited knowledge in the security realm. But it you know, basically like what happened on Thursday last week was like a big step forward. And if it hadn't gone through that stage, then you can't.
All bets are off. Yeah.
All bets are off. Yeah. So now we're past that stage, and there's still like more approvals that are necessary, you know, before you can actually like have a ticker listing for a spot ETF. But my understanding is that most of those are more clerical and ministerial in nature in terms of the approval than the sort of substantive approval that was necessary.
What do you think happened internally? Because, you know, the comments that have come out of this is unprecedented. They've been saying, oh, it came from the top to make this change. So like, what have you been hearing about like how this happened and why this happened?
Yeah, so you know what? One of the names that I heard a whole bunch last week that I was not familiar with before is a guy named Jaime Lizarraga, who's an SEC commissioner, was a Pelosi staffer for a long time, like very like has been involved in like financial regulation in DC for a long time. Apparently, he kind of flipped positions on crypto and specifically on the ETF. He was a no vote on the Bitcoin ETF, from what I understand, and changed that and is now supporting the ETH ETF. And like without, again, I'm not totally the guy who knows like all the inside baseball, but basically this person was like wants Gensler's job, and is like, okay, like he is now seeing that like Gensler has a failed strategy with respect to crypto.
He's blood in the water. He's going for it.
He's going to just try to do it the other way. And so apparently that was a big driving factor. And it was an unknown until
what's this guy's name?
Lizarraga. So it's L-I...
Jaime Lizarraga.
Yeah.
And so what is his history? Has he been historically anti-crypto and he's now flipping?
Yep.
And so do you think he's just flipping just for politics? Or do you think this is
I
genuine...
would assume so. Okay. I mean, like, I can only guess, but that seems like that the winds are shifting and he's going to shift with them, which I don't criticize. That's what politics is.
That's really what it's all about. But yeah, it's been a crazy 180. Also, we talked about stablecoin legislation a bit earlier, like it's part of Fit 21. I'm wondering if you've seen other stablecoin legislation that on the horizon? Is it just FIT21? Are there other things
No,
going on?
The Loomis bill is still out there. I think at this point, like Fit 21 is really taking all the oxygen out of the room because it passed the House. But like we were talking about, has to get through the Senate. That seems somewhat unlikely at this point. So
we need to get it to a different committee.
Exactly.
You got to get it to the Intelligence Committee or something.
Yeah. And so I actually think that like the Loomis bill is just as likely to become law as Fit 21 is at this point. So, you know, I do think that, one of the things, if I can make a prediction, I'm probably wrong, but make a prediction, which is that it seems like we're going to see this discussion about central bank digital currency kind of come back and be part of the broader crypto conversation. It sort of was maybe a couple of years ago, and sort of
it already is. You hear Trump out on a campaign trail saying, "I will not allow a CBDC."
Yeah. I don't even think he knows what that means. But it's becoming part of the vernacular, and it's important. It's an important, even if we got one politician who's just sort of spouting off a bunch of shit about it to be oppositional, I do think it's good to have the conversation about CBDCs, because what we have to decide, right, is whether we want to have digital cash or not. And I think the answer is, for me, I'm an anti-surveillance person. So for me, the answer is digital cash is the way to go. But you talk to the anti-money laundering people, and they're like, well, secrecy is bad. Everybody should just transact out in the open to a certain extent. And it's a complicated conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we covered everything here legislatively and what's going on Capitol Hill and the wind shifting and all that. But you're actually working on a new project. And Lexnode. I want to get into that. So I was doing a bit of research on MetaLex. And basically, you're helping protocols decentralize, because the little bit of clarity we have gotten is protocols may start off centralized, but over time, if they become sufficiently decentralized, then they're not securities. And so you guys, how did this come about? Did you guys see an opportunity we can help protocols and projects and L2s and all that become sufficiently decentralized? What's going on here?
Yeah, so MetaLex is a project that I co-founded along with another attorney named Gabe Shapiro. It's really Gabe's idea. Gabe's really the driving force behind this. Tweets under Lexnode, was general counsel for Delphi Labs for a long time. Just probably, I would say he's the best crypto lawyer out there. If I had to pick one, certainly the most knowledgeable in terms of where the law and tech kind of intersect. And so the problem that we're really trying to solve at MetaLex is this idea, how to handle legal personhood of DAOs, right? DAOs are organizations. That's what the O stands for. And so any organization in the eye of the law, American law especially, has at least the potential of being a legal person, right? And we saw this in Uki DAO. We've seen it play out in a number of other ways, especially in private litigation when DAOs get sued. If you're on a multi-sig, what does that really mean in terms of your relationship to the assets in that multi-sig, to the protocol tokens, et cetera? And the state of crypto law is kind of shit in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that it's shit is we have these structures, right, that are sort of the conventional wisdom for how protocols should organize. And the big one that we've seen, I think the most popular one that's been most enduring, which is not shit, is actually somewhat intelligent, is the Cayman Island or Panama or Swiss Foundation, this sort of ownerless entity that contracts with a sort of standard corporation that does the development work on the protocol. So the protocol itself lives in the foundation, and then there's this other sort of thing that looks like a more standard tech company that is, provides services to that foundation. And the problem with this approach is that where does the DAO fit in? What is the DAO in this setup? And so you hear people talk about wrapped and unwrapped DAOs. I think that's become part of the vernacular. And the wrapped DAO is a DAO that's embodied by a legal entity, and the unwrapped DAO is the opposite, one that's not. And that dichotomy, I think, is insufficient. So what we've done at MetaLex is we've created a type of entity that we call a board, which is a cybernetically enhanced organization. And the board basically is an entity. It's a separate legal person from the DAO, from the protocol, from everything that has a specific purpose within the protocol and is fundamentally accountable to the DAO as a voting organization, right? And so it's like kind of taking the mentality of multinational corporate structures, right, where you have different legal entities that fulfill different specific purposes within that structure, and bringing that to DAOs, right, to where you have a legal entity that is going to take on some specific purpose. So for example, the best example I think is we've got something we're developing which is called a grants board. What a grants board is it's a legal entity that is designed to take funds from a DAO and use those funds to compensate contributors, however broadly you want to define contributors. And what makes it, I think, different from the run-of-the-mill DevCo, right, is it is itself an ownerless foundation. So we want to keep all of our boards as ownerless foundations. Like that's, I think, quite important. And that instead of going out and separately raising capital and having shareholders who are owed fiduciary duties, and maybe you have this split equity between shareholders and tokens, and it's, where the fiduciary duties lie is quite complicated. We wanted to get rid of the whole idea of like this entity owing anybody outside of it any kind of duty, right? And basically saying, okay, this entity is just a multi-sig. I mean, like, when you work long enough in DeFi and in crypto, you start to see that all over the place, right? Like, all right, you say you have a DAO, but you're really just 5 people on a multi-sig, right? And maybe you pay attention
multi-sig fi.
Yeah, multi-sig fi. Yeah, exactly. And so, so we kind of wanted to lean into that, right? And say, okay, that's what this entity is. This entity is a multi-sig. Its decisions are controlled by the people on the multi-sig. Now, how do we put constraints on that entity's decision-making process such that it has no option if it wants to continue to exist besides following the will of the DAO? And like the way you do that, the way we've decided to do that is not through pen and paper contracts, right? But through smart contracts. So what our tech stack really looks like is a highly modified safe, just a Gnosis safe, right? That we've put a lot of bells and whistles on that allow a DAO to grant funding to and take funding away from if it's performing or not performing. And so that's the big goal with like a grants board, for example. Is like, okay, the DAO can say we're going to give you we're going to give to the grants board $100,000 worth of our protocol tokens. The board can enter into 4 contracts with providers, and then once it gets to the end of that grant, we have the DAO has to decide whether to re-up it, and if the board stops doing what it's supposed to do, the funding can be taken away by the DAO. If the board stops operating at all, the assets automatically.
Is all this like automatic? Is this all facilitated through smart contracts? Like
exactly. Yeah.
So if the board is not fulfilling their duties to the DAO can call a function and get those funds back.
Correct. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, I like that a lot.
So yeah, it really is. We're trying to like create entities that are truly DeFi native, and
will MetaLex become a DAO and have bestow governance responsibility to its members?
So right now, MetaLex is actually 2 companies. It's a Delaware C Corp that's just like a standard tech company where all of our smart contracts are being developed, and then it's also a law firm as well. So
okay,
if you go, which is kind of cool. I've never really done anything like it. It's exciting. I don't think anybody's ever really done
this is the first time I'm hearing about this type of structure.
Yeah, so like really like, and so the way we have it arranged is that part of the fee revenue from the law firm just automatically gets paid to the tech company as a license fee for our use of the tech that's being developed.
Very cool.
Law firm. And I think it's great. I think it's awesome for our clients, right? Because if you come in and you hire, there's just 3 attorneys. It's myself, Gabe, and an attorney named Andrew Glidden, who make up the law firm side of MetaLex. But if you hire any of us, you sort of get access to this smart contract development shop as well. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that we're the first law firm to do something like this, but I think it's going to become a lot more standard, not just in crypto, but in all aspects of tech law, to actually have like a technology company embedded in a law firm. And so the goal with boards is to actually have our tech stack be open source. We envision ourselves as a software as a service company. But the smart contracts themselves are going to be open source. Our web interface is proprietary, and we're not quite at the point where we can demo it. I'm very eager to demo it to you when we can, because it's going to be really cool.
Soon, TM.
Yeah, soon, TM. And the idea is that we don't really see these as necessarily immediately becoming like off the shelf. You just go pay some money and then you have a board, because there's always going to be the legal side of it. It's always going to require a little bit of like finessing. But in general, we want this to become the standard way that DAOs operate. And what we're hoping to see in the next couple of years is that when more DAOs start to use this tech stack and these modified multisigs, it will actually create new ways for DAOs to interact with each other. And that will create new ways for commerce to happen. So what we're really hoping is that, like in DeFi, right, where you have sort of the magic of DeFi is these composable transactions that can be embedded within other transactions, and then you can create types of contracts and agreements that just never have existed before. We're hoping to take that same mentality to legal relationships and have
it's like the next evolution. You have this new novel hybrid structure of a technology company and a law firm combined. And then what you're trying to do is, like you said, facilitate new types of interactions and transactions and relationships between DAO to DAO, even between like DAO to tech company. Like, it doesn't have to stop there.
Exactly. Yeah. And we really want to see more. I think that one of the highest and best uses of smart contracts is these sort of like rigid and predictable agreements, right? Where you part of the law is always discretionary, and part of entity management is always discretionary. And so we want to see legal entities organized in such a fashion where that human discretion is cabineted into the places where it needs to be and doesn't leak over into other places. And when you have that leakage of human discretion, what occurs is things get less predictable. It's harder to understand what an entity is going to do. And so just like, one of the primitives and sort of backbones of DeFi are CDPs, collateralized debt protocols, where okay, I just know what's going to happen, right? I will get liquidated if X, Y, Z thing occurs. We want to see more legal relationships actually look like that, to sort of take out the discretionary
that
part.
They're objective and predictable instead of subjective and subject to interpretation.
Exactly.
I understand. Very cool. Yeah, we'll definitely have to have you on again when you're ready to roll that out fully. We're reaching the end of this episode, but before we go, I have one lightning round question to ask you, and It is, who would you recommend as a guest? Who do you want to see on the show next time?
Next time I'm gonna try. Sorry, this is a shameless plug. I'm gonna beg and plead for my business partner Gabe to come on.
Yes, I would love for him to come on.
He's gonna do when we have an actual product to demo. He's gonna do a better job of describing it than I will.
I'd love to have him on. Yeah, whenever you're ready, you guys are welcome whenever.
Awesome, I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks so much. Also, before we go, can you give away your socials? Where can they find you? Where they can find MetaLex if you guys have socials yet?
Yeah, so MetaLex, we're all over Twitter. We got a website if you want to sign up for our waiting list. We have a Telegram group as well, and then I'm dumbape69420 on Twitter and so you can always find me there.
Yeah, there we go. Alex, thanks so much for coming on again. Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much. It's always a pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. See ya.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, for watching this episode of Flywheel with Alex G. I'm your host, DeFi Dave. Hard to believe that next week will be our 2-year mark. Actually a week and a half. The first episode was June 9th, so we haven't missed a week in 2 years, and I'm really proud of that. And I just want to say thank you to my co-host, Kit, to Sam, our producer, to Pipo, to Louie, to Carissa, to Piff, to the entire team at Flywheel for keeping the flywheel spinning here. Really exciting things on the horizon. And yeah, just really excited for all that. Just wanted to say that. So if you want to keep up with everything Flywheel, make sure you go ahead, subscribe, hit that bell button, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. Give us a like, please. Make sure to follow us on all our social media on Twitter, TikTok, and Telegram at Flywheel DeFi. Go ahead, subscribe to our website, flywheeldefi.com. You can follow me on Twitter at DeFiDave22. And we'll see you next week. Everything said on this episode is not financial or tax advice. This channel is strictly for educational purposes and is not an investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any assets or to make any financial decisions. This video is not tax advice whatsoever. Please talk to your accountant and do your own research.